very happy to be here today. I'm Sara, and I'm going to be speaking to you today about using data science as a force for good. So, first of all, why data science as a force for good? I want to start by asking you, did you know that 90% of all the data that was created in the last 2 years, and that actually today it would take about 180 million years to download all the data from the internet. So we all know that the amount of data that is available has been increasingly massively during the last years, and we know that's likely not going to stop. So in fact, we know that by 2020, every person will generate about 1.7 megabytes in just a second. So while this happens, what we've been seeing is that private sector organizations have been building and deploying data science capabilities for many years. And at the same time, public sector organizations, civic organizations, and non-profit, most of them are far behind. And what we know is that most of these organizations, they really have a big appetite to use data science, but most of them don't have the capabilities or the skills to do that. So it's a fact that everyone produces data, but in reality, not everyone benefits from data. But from my experience over the last 4 years, we know that when these organizations, these public sector, non-profit organizations are empowered with the right tools, with the right knowledge and the right talent, data science can really act as a force for good, impacting on the lives of people that we really care. And so what do we mean by using data science as a force for good? We mean by using data science, doing data science projects that tackle real-world problems. And typically, these projects fulfill 3 different criteria. One is the problem that we are trying to solve is important and generates social impact. That's the big one. The second is that data can actually play a role solving the problem. And the third one is that the partner organization, the organization that we're working with, is ready to tackle this problem and take actions based on the data science work. And these are some of the areas where data science can really have an impact. So from education, health, energy, criminal justice, financial inclusion, public safety, there are many, many areas where data science can have an impact. So what I wanted to do now is give you a bit more detail about 3 projects that I've been involved in the last 3 years, in the last year. 3 examples that hopefully will cover 3 different areas. So one in the health space, one in the employment space, and the last one in children's services. So starting by the health one, we did a project this year with the hospital of Salamanca in Spain. The problem that we're trying to solve, and what we found out is that cardiologists, at least in the hospital of Salamanca in Spain, they spend a lot of time from the moment they take an echocardiogram to the moment they can do a diagnosis. So they spend a lot of time categorizing the image, marking up the heart chambers, and calculating the measurements. And in fact, this process can take about 10 minutes, and if you see 40 patients per day, this can mean about 7 hours in a day that doctors spend. So doctors spend a lot of time in this process. The solution that we built was a data science pipeline that would help estimate these measurements and so suggest to doctors what the status, so that they could better identify the patients. We used 25,000 echocardiograms and an anonymized database of measurements. And the approach we've taken, we've started by extracting DICOM images of videos for filtering. Then we've obtained the labels for the videos. Then we generated the pixel max of the left ventricle and atrium and predict the max for the heart chambers. Then the 4th step was to estimate the measurements based on the segmentation. And really the last step was to recommend the patient status of normal, gray zone, or abnormal based on the expert thresholds. The impact of the project, so I think with this project, we are likely to free up to 20% of cardiologists' time. And this means they can see up to 4 to 6 patients more each day just in the hospital of Salamanca. And this also means that doctors can spend more time with patients that really need. So this covered health projects. The next project that I want to talk to you was a project we've partnered with IFP, so the Instituto de Emprego e Formação Profissional. And this is the government institute that is responsible for improving and reducing unemployment in Portugal. As you might know, when someone in Portugal gets unemployed, the first thing they do is they go to a job center and they register in a job center. And after they register, they get a job counselor that spends some time doing counseling and really trying to come up with intervention and training that allows that person to find employment. And the question here was, okay, when a job counselor gets a new job seeker, how do they, based on the profile of the job seeker, how do they know which are the best interventions to recommend to that person? Because they really face a big list of interventions and trainings they can recommend. What we did was we created a recommendation system that suggests relevant and effective interventions to the job seeker. What do we mean by relevant and effective? By relevant, we mean interventions that are adjusted to the context of the job seeker. So if we're speaking about a disabled person, making sure that the intervention and the training that we are suggesting is appropriate. And by effective, we mean that we are suggesting the interventions and the trainings that make that person more likely to achieve employment. So the data that we use, we were lucky to have a national database of 9 years of IFP data, and this covered 3.1 million job seekers, 101 million transactions, and 255 training courses. And this is just a prototype of what the solution might be. So you basically, as a job counselor, you put the user ID and you see a combination of interventions and the predicted time to employment. So for instance, in this case, you have a combination of training and interventions that get the person likely to get employed in 6 months. The approach, so the approach we've taken, we got a big database, as I was saying, from IFP, and it was basically transactional data. So a lot of the work we had to do was to transform that transactional data into some sort of user journey table. And for that, it was really important to have the involvement of the specialists in the area to understand the data and to really create a user journey table that we could use for model. The second step was to train the models on different employment outcomes. And the different employment outcomes we used was, okay, does this person want to achieve employment as fast as possible? Are we looking for long-term employment, or are we looking for employment that fits the skills of the person? And we trained the models based on the profile. And the profile of the person was composed of the demographics of that person, the preferences, and the skills. The next step was evaluating the recommendations by comparing with the ground truth of reference groups. And in the end, what we got was a system that, based on the profile of the job seeker, was able to recommend what would be the interventions that were most likely get that person to employment. The impact? We are likely to help with these recommendations. We're likely to help 300,000 job seekers in Portugal and support 1,500 jobs counselors to work more efficiently and effectively. And by doing this, we're also helping IFP expanding their data-driven capabilities. So this was the second example. The third example was an example of a project we did back in the UK with the Newcastle City Council. And this was, the domain was a bit different. So here we were working with the Children's Services Department in Newcastle. And what we found is that the service leads from the Children's Services Department, the Children's Services are the services of the council that are supporting vulnerable children. They were really struggling to understand how these vulnerable children moved across services, because they were collecting data based on services and not based on person. And so, although they were able to see how that service was doing, they weren't really able to see how people were moving across the services. And so the solution, what we built, was a person-centered data model that allowed us to do some journey analysis and some segmentation analysis for the most at-risk children in Newcastle. We had 20 years of data, 1.3 million records, and about more than 8 data sets from different services. The approach we've taken, so obviously we had to do a lot of data cleaning and data mining, but the biggest part of the work was actually matching the records to have this person-centered data model. And once we got to that person-centered data model, we then went to do some journey analysis and segmentation. So the impact, what was really interesting in this project is that by doing this, we were able to find out that vulnerable children that had access to preventative services were less likely to achieve bad outcomes. So this was quite important to prove the importance of preventative services. And what this really helped the local authority to make the case for actually allocate more budget into preventative services on the following year. By doing this, we were also able to identify young people that were most likely to benefit from these services. And as a third outcome, we were also able to measure the effectiveness of some of these services. So I've covered 3 different projects here. From really different areas: health and employment, children's services, but there are a lot more. One other project that we worked this year was in Uganda with an organization called Barefoot Law. And the project was really aiming to reduce the response times to citizen legal questions across Africa. So this is a completely different project on the legal space. So as you can see here, there's really a range of different areas, different countries, different partners where you can do data science and have an impact. Before I move on, I just wanted to ask you, what if there is no data? And that's something I've found more than once in the last 4 years, is sometimes these organizations and partners really want to do data science projects, but they don't really have data available. So what can you do and how can you help them in that case? And in that case, what we've done is we spent a lot of time with these partners trying to understand, okay, you want to use data to improve your decisions. So let's start to understand what are the decisions that you want to improve. What are the questions you want to answer? And by doing that, the next step is to understand, okay, to answer these questions, what is the data that you need? And start to map out the different data fields and the different data that you need. And once you have that data, okay, what are the processes that we need to have in place to actually make sure that you start to collect that data and to make sure that you start to build a foundation so that in a couple of years, that partner and that organization can make decisions based on the data and can start to do projects like this. So that's something to have in mind. Okay, so I think this probably looks quite cool, and you're probably asking, how does this compare with a typical data science project? And here I want to talk to you through about 4 points. Let's start with collaboration and diversity. So typically these projects, we partner with organizations. It could be governmental organizations, non-profit, civic organizations, and we work through collaboration with a team. And what's really important about this team, obviously, it includes data scientists, machine learning, engineers, data experts. But I think the important part here is that we also include social experts, domain knowledge experts, people that really understand the issue. So it's really key to have a diverse team that really can understand the issue that we're trying to solve. And what I mean by diverse, I don't mean by just the skills, but I mean having a team that reflects the population that we're trying to help. Because if the team really doesn't get the problem, we could have the best data science team in the world and still don't have an impact. And that's the same thing about the partners. So partners are really, really key here. You could have the best specialists in the world, but if the partner organization doesn't understand what you're doing, doesn't trust what you're doing, you're very unlikely to be successful. And so that's why partners are really important, and it's really important to have them engaged in this process. And the last point here is communication. So we know that a lot of these organizations, they want to use data science. They probably don't have the capabilities as we have. So communication becomes really important. Using a language that they understand, use visualizations that make things a bit easier to understand, because if they don't really understand and trust, they are unlikely to make any actions based on our work. Open source. So what we've seen is that a lot of the projects I've been involved. So we work with one partner in one place, trying to solve a specific issue, and we are successful in doing that. And then we go somewhere else and we see a partner that is struggling with the same problem, potentially in the same space or a different space, but actually requires a similar solution. So this is really an opportunity to share the learnings and scale solutions for common problems. So all of the projects we've been doing, we typically do in open source. Okay, the third point is ethics and transparency. Here, as we're talking about particularly vulnerable people, I think it's even more and more important, and we really have the responsibility to make this process as transparent as possible and to communicate to all the stakeholders in the process, including sometimes the end users of this process, including sometimes the patients or the children in the families, so that they can really, when the job seeker gets a recommendation, they understand, okay, why did I receive this recommendation? And if you tell them, okay, you got this suggestion to do this training because actually we look at people that had a similar profile, and this is what people, by doing this, you were more likely to be successful. I think this is really important. And the last one is quite related, which is having in mind that we are using data and doing data science to have an impact on people. And so if our final goal is to have an impact on people, we should really make sure that we keep the person and a human in the center and the heart of the process throughout the whole process. The last thing I want to tell you is that over the last 4 to 5 years, there's been a really big increase in the number of people, data science, data enthusiasts that want to use their skills and their experience as a force for good. I've been involved this summer in, as Luis mentioned, has been working as a project manager in the Data Science for Social Good summer fellowship with Imperial College in London. I'm very proud to say that one of the first and biggest communities in Europe is a Data Science for Social Good Portugal, which is represented outside. But there are other initiatives and organizations that are trying to do this. There's DataKind, some of you might know. I work for Social Finance Digital Labs in London, which is trying to build technology for social change. There's a big AI community in London trying to bring AI experts and try to see how they can use it for good. And more recently, there was a big initiative from Rockefeller Foundation in the United States that brought a big pot of money to try to solve the world's most pressing social issues, so in partnership with MasterCard. So there is a big community, and I hope that by giving you some examples of projects I've worked with, I've inspired you. And if you feel curious to know more, I'll be outside, I'll be around, come and speak to me. And I really wanted to finish by quoting Raid Ghani, which is a data science for social good founder. And in his last closing speech this summer, he finished by saying something which that resonates a lot to me. So once you start to have an impact on people's lives, it's really hard not to continue to do that. So thank you, and looking forward to meet you.